In the ancient Mediterranean, health had seemed simple only from a distance. People watched bodies change with seasons, work, and diet, and they wanted a system that explained it. Physicians and writers built one around balance. The body, they said, ran on internal fluids called humors, and each one carried qualities like heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. If those qualities drifted too far, illness followed. Food stopped being just food. It became a tool. That tool came with a new kind of logic. A person did not only eat to feel full, they ate to correct themselves. Too hot and the body needed cooling, too sluggish and damp, and it needed drying and warmth. So foods were sorted by the effects they were believed to cause, not by taste. Wine and pepper leaned hot. Cucumbers and many leafy greens leaned cold. The kitchen turned into a form of medicine, and every meal carried a risk. Once hot and cold became medical categories, a humble plant could start to look suspicious. A food that cooled and moistened sounded helpful in one situation, dangerous in another. Cooling might calm fever, but it might also weaken digestion, slow the body, or thin the strength people associated with healthy blood. The same leaf that refreshed could also, in this thinking, take something vital away. That assumption set the trap for lettuce long before medieval fear. In the early Middle Ages, much of the old medical learning survived in a quieter way. Monasteries kept books, copied notes, and treated the sick with what they had: routine, observation, and a simple humoral logic. Outside the cloister, household healers did something similar, but with kitchens instead of libraries. Food stayed central because it felt controllable. If health depended on balance, then meals became daily medicine. That belief shaped what people planted. Gardens near homes and religious houses produced herbs and greens that doubled as remedies, and lettuce took a clearer place among them. It looked unmistakable, it grew reliably, and it fit a useful category: cooling. When bodies felt overheated from fever, hard work, or rich foods, lettuce seemed like an answer. But in humoral thinking, every help carried a risk. Cooling could calm, yet it also could drain. So, lettuce entered diets with an invisible warning attached. Eaten at the right moment, it promised to soften heat and settle the body. Eaten at the wrong moment, it threatened to tip someone toward weakness, especially when strength was already low. The idea did not require panic or superstition. It required consistency. If cold foods cooled, then lettuce cooled. And once it had that reputation, every serving became a small medical decision. In the 11th and 12th centuries, learned medicine in Europe did not just drift along in monasteries anymore. It accelerated. Scholars worked through translations of older medical writings into Latin, and then teachers began using those texts to train a new kind of medical reader. Ideas that once circulated loosely now appeared in organized written form. Food mattered because it seemed controllable, and lettuce became a test case for how this revived medicine classified the world. These new Latin medical texts treated lettuce less like a simple garden plant and more like a substance with a predictable profile. They placed it firmly in the cold and moist category. That label carried consequences. Coldness suggested a cooling effect on the body's internal balance, especially the blood. Moistness suggested softening and weakening. The logic did not depend on taste alone. It depended on the belief that every food pushed the body in one direction or another. So lettuce started to appear with explicit claims about what it did. It cooled, it dampened, and, crucially, it affected strength. If the blood cooled too much in this system, vitality seemed to drop with it, and the body looked easier to exhaust. The point was not that lettuce was always forbidden. The point was that it now came with rules. Once written into Latin teaching texts, that warning travelled farther and sounded more certain. By the 13th century, medicine stopped being only something borrowed from old books or kept in a monastery garden. It became a profession, taught and tested in universities. That shift changed how food advice worked. A leaf like lettuce no longer sat in the category of ordinary eating. It entered the category of management. Doctors treated diet like a tool they controlled, not a habit people guessed at. Physicians now wrote structured regimens aimed at specific bodies, not just general rules. They weighed age, work, season, and weakness. Under that logic, lettuce could fit two opposite roles. For a patient running hot, restless, or inflamed, its cold and moist nature looked useful. But for someone already pale, tired, or recovering, the same leaf looked dangerous. It threatened to cool too far and drain strength. So lettuce became something that could be prescribed, timed, or limited. A doctor could recommend it in one case and forbid it in another, and both decisions sounded scientific within the same system. That was the real change. The fear did not come from the plant itself, but from the new authority around it. Once physicians claimed diet as medical territory, lettuce stopped being just food and started acting like a small, everyday drug. By the late Middle Ages, the warning about lettuce no longer stayed inside university medicine. It travelled in regimen manuals and household guides meant for ordinary readers, the kind of practical writing that told people how to eat, sleep, work, and recover. These texts turned a learned idea into a daily rule. Lettuce still counted as cooling, but now the danger sounded personal. It could take away the body's needed warmth. The advice grew more specific, and the fear narrowed onto timing. Eaten when the body already ran cold, lettuce supposedly pushed it further, leaving people sluggish and less resilient. Some guides linked that cooling to desire, warning that lettuce dulled sexual appetite and weakened virility, not as morality, but as physiology. A simple salad became a suspect choice. The wrong meal at the wrong hour looked like a quiet step toward weakness. Digestion became the final pressure point. These manuals claimed the stomach needed heat to cook food into strength, and lettuce arrived as the opposite of fuel. Taken at the start of a meal, or late at night, it supposedly slowed the stomach and left food sitting heavy. The message spread from scholars to kitchens. Lettuce had its place, but it demanded caution. In this logic, comfort and health depended on not letting coldness win. Cooks did not simply throw lettuce out, they adjusted it. Within humoral thinking, lettuce stayed cold and moist, so the meal around it had to do extra work. The goal was balance, not purity. If a leafy plant threatened to cool the body too far, then the plate needed a counterweight, something that pushed the body back toward warmth and steadiness. So, lettuce increasingly arrived with ingredients that carried a warmer reputation. Sharp vinegar cut through its dampness. Oil added weight and smoothness that felt less chilling. Wine and spiced seasonings brought bite, heat, and motion to digestion, at least in the logic people trusted. These pairings turned lettuce from a risky raw green into a managed food, made safer by design. That change mattered because it moved the medical warning into everyday habit. Diners learned that lettuce was not just eaten, it was handled. A salad became a small act of prevention. Warm it with spice, tighten it with vinegar, strengthen it with oil, chase it with wine. The fear of coldness stayed, but it no longer ended the meal. It reshaped it. In the 14th century, sickness stopped feeling occasional and started feeling close. Epidemics returned, fevers spread, and even healthy people watched their bodies for signs of collapse. Under humoral thinking, one idea rose above the rest. Heat meant life. Heat powered digestion, kept strength up, and helped the body fight off corruption. So anything that seemed to drain that heat suddenly looked less like food and more like a gamble. That shift changed how lettuce was judged. It already carried the label of cold and moist, but now that label landed harder. When people feared chills, weakness, or a lingering fever, a cooling leaf sounded like the wrong move. Lettuce became suspicious in certain seasons too, when the air itself seemed colder and the body felt easier to tip into imbalance. The same plant that could soothe suddenly threatened to sink a person further. So warnings tightened in everyday practice. During illness, and especially in recovery, people avoided foods that might quench the body's inner fire, and lettuce sat near the top of that list. What had once been managed with careful paring now carried a stigma. It looked like a shortcut to weakness. In a time when survival seemed to depend on holding on to warmth, lettuce was no longer just cool, it was risky. In the 15th century, the warning about lettuce stopped sounding like a distant theory and started sounding like a daily problem. Medical writers linked the leaf to effects people recognized immediately: heavy eyelids, a slowed body, a kind of dimmed energy after eating. Lettuce still counted as cold and moist, but now the coldness had a clear result. It did not just cool the blood, it made a person feel cooled. That shift mattered because sleepiness sounded harmless until it got translated into weakness. If lettuce made the body relax, writers claimed, it also made the body less ready to work, to recover, to resist strain. Cooling stopped being an invisible process inside the veins and turned into a warning about outcomes: sluggish limbs, reduced strength, a softer pulse. The message tightened. Eat it at the wrong moment and the day went badly. So lettuce became a food people weighed against their immediate condition. Writers treated it as something that might suit a hot, restless body, but harmed anyone already tired, already pale, already run down. Cooling the blood now carried a picture. A person dulled and drained, not sharpened and steady. The leaf's reputation did not rest on rare extremes. It rested on ordinary sensations: sleep, weakness, and the fear that weakness invited worse. As Europe moved into the Renaissance, the old food rules did not vanish, but they faced a new kind of pressure. More physicians paid attention to the body itself, not just the balance of hot and cold on a page. Anatomical study pushed people to ask where digestion happened, what organs actually did, and how weakness really developed. Lettuce still carried a familiar warning, but now the question sounded different. Was it truly cooling the blood or simply hard to process? Early modern investigators started treating eating as a physical process that could be observed. They watched how the stomach changed food, how the intestines moved it along, and how different bodies reacted differently. That approach did not instantly replace humours, but it cracked the certainty. If digestion depended on mechanical mixing, fermentation, and bodily fluids, then lettuce might cause trouble for reasons that were not mystical temperature at all. The same old symptom could get a new explanation. That created a split that ordinary people lived with for generations. The inherited rule still sounded clear: lettuce cooled and cooling weakened. But an emerging view treated food as material that interacted with organs, timing and quantity, not just qualities like cold and moist. So advice drifted. Some still warned against lettuce for the fragile and the sick. Others treated it as a light food, manageable when digestion was strong, shifting fear into a more practical question of tolerance. By the time humoral warnings began to fade, lettuce no longer sat inside the old fear of coldness draining strength. New ways of thinking about the body treated food less like a force that shifted heat and moisture, and more like material the body processed and used. That shift changed the question. People asked what lettuce contained, how it digested, and what it contributed, rather than what it chilled. Modern nutrition language replaced the older moral and medical drama. Lettuce became water-rich, low in calories, and associated with fiber and vitamins, the kind of food that fitted diets meant for weight control or heart health. Its effects got framed as gentle and predictable. The old cautions about weakness or dulled vigor lost their urgency. A salad stopped looking like a risk and started looking like a sensible choice. Yet the medieval idea never completely vanished. It survived as a phrase and a memory. People still used cooling words to describe foods, but the meaning changed from danger to comfort. Lettuce became something that felt light, not something that threatened life heat. In the end, the contrast looked stark. What once seemed capable of weakening the body now read as a symbol of health, and cooling the blood stayed mostly as history.